Hello there, and welcome to 3Spoonies. We're your hosts, Karen, Jo, and Claire. This is episode number 60.5, and we're discussing labels and language. Let's get into some questions.
Are you drowning in admin? Struggling to keep up with emails, invoices, social media, or the endless to-do list that comes with running a business? Then it's time to call in Vicky Admin Fairy, an award-winning virtual assistant who brings order to admin chaos. Vicky works with all entrepreneurs, regardless of their background or abilities, to take care of the time-consuming tasks that slow you down. Whether it's managing emails, sorting financial admin, handling social media, chasing late payments, the list is endless. She saves business owners hours every week, reducing stress and ensuring everything runs smoothly. With 25 years of experience, a flexible, client-focused approach, and a reputation for going above and beyond, Vicky adapts to your needs, making your business more efficient so you can focus on what you do best. And the best part? You'll have more free time to grow your business, boost profits, or just enjoy life without admin headaches. Want to free up your time and get your business running more smoothly? Visit www.vickyadminfairy.co.uk or email hello@vickyadminfairy.co.uk to find out how Vicky can help you.
Hello, I'm Karen from Pony Pony Pony.
And I'm Jo from Bright Cat Business Solutions.
Claire from Strange Little Obsessions.
And together, we're 3Spoonies navigating our way through life and business with not enough spoons. So we're going to be...
And we may have gone mad.
Were we ever sane to start with?
No, but like worse.
If there's a sliding scale, a downwards sliding scale.
Anyway, sorry, I digress.
So, over to Claire for some questions. Whoosh!
Love and sliding. Oh, we've definitely lost it today. Okay,
Yeah.
So I have questions, lots of questions. I say lots of questions. I have 3 questions. Our first question is from Debbie, who says, I was diagnosed with ADD, which isn't even a thing anymore, back when you couldn't be diagnosed with autism and ADHD. Is it worth getting an official diagnosis for autism now I'm in my 30s?
I would say yes, because the amount of women who have needed it for either ADHD or autism when they hit menopause, and they could have been sorted out earlier, because apparently if you've got those, you will hit menopause likely earlier. And if you don't have that diagnosis, that's how you can't possibly be in menopause in your 40s or earlier. So yeah, go for it. Plus, then I understand it's good for the understanding you.
Yeah, I know that being in your 30s, that's your entire life, so that's a very long time, but there are people who are diagnosed in their 50s, 60s, later. So if it would be helpful to you to have the diagnosis, either because it means some support can be put in place, or just for your own understanding, really, I'd say, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both of you. At the end of the day, there's nothing to lose by getting it. It can only benefit you in some ways or just help you maybe have a better understanding as well. Yeah, I think we all agreed on that one. Our next one is from Garth. He says, my sister uses an out-of-date, insulting term to describe her disability. I feel like she's using it to put herself down rather than reclaiming. She's often negative about herself. I don't want to police her language, to be clear. How do I bring it up, or should I?
My first thought is, ooh.
My thought is, I think we've talked about it before or touched on it. It's also kind of a way of coping with it. So it could be that for her, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I suppose it depends how exactly she's using it. Is she using it as dark humour? In which
It
case,
depends on what it is as well.
Yeah.
It's a hard one without knowing context.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also depends if it's, sort of self-deprecating or self-depreciating. If she does have a tendency to put herself down, it might just be a reflex. Yeah, it might be worth a discussion. I personally don't like it when people put themselves down. I think it's too easy of a habit to fall into. But yeah, talk to her. It may just be a term she feels more comfortable with than you do, but I don't think you can really tell without speaking to her.
And by
Yeah.
speaking to her, it's not a bad thing because you're letting her know how it's making you feel, and you don't want her to be putting herself down. So
Mm,
it will just help you both have a better understanding.
And also check in how she's feeling about it,
mm,
like the whole condition itself, and maybe you could help her work through it, and then she might use better language.
mm. Yeah.
Obviously not in a preaching tone, in a "I'm concerned about you" tone.
Yeah, come in with peace, love, and understanding, and all will be well. God, that sounded
Mhm.
really kind of culty.
Woo woo.
Sorry. Yeah, we are not building a cult, I swear. Maybe we should because there's money in that. Anyway, I'm digressing again. It's one of those days.
It is one of those days.
I think it's that loud noise we had in between. It's just scrambled my brain a little bit.
Yeah, so do tell us if you in the comments if you'd like us to build a cult.
This is going to be our next plan. No, it's not. We
No,
don't need a
it's not.
cult. We took it too big as it is. Anyway, back to questions. So Lindsay says there are multiple terms for my condition. Some are more accurate than others. Is it okay to insist that the right term is used and explain why? I say absolutely,
I
because
say absolutely.
Mm.
especially if the information about your disability is being shared around between medical professionals, it's incredibly important that it is accurate and right.
Yeah, there can also be times when there's a sort of umbrella term and a specific term within that. So being more accurate can be helpful. Or, yes, there's some things where there's maybe older terms that aren't helpful anymore.
Or they've just
People's,
been updated.
yeah,
Like the recent PCOS has just been updated.
yeah. Yeah, I think the explaining it is the key thing. That if there's a term that is more accurate and why it's more accurate, or sometimes terms are used interchangeably and they're not quite the same thing or not at all the same thing. So I say it's not a problem explaining it. If you're there with sort of an air horn every time someone uses the wrong term and blast it, that might be a bit much. But if you're prepared to have a discussion about it and explain either your preferred term or the more accurate term, or I think it sort of will depend very much. But, you know, if people can understand why and what the distinction is, I wouldn't imagine many people would have trouble with using the correct term. And again, it may take a few tries for people if it's not a term they're familiar with, and that's not necessarily malicious.
Yeah, don't get angry if they get it wrong. Just gently correct them for a second time, third time.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between someone using a default term they've not thought about before and someone who is deliberately using the wrong thing. Those come from very different places, and while both can be frustrating, I think the approaches to both would be very different. And, you know, if it was the case that someone continued to use the wrong term, either to wind you up or for some other reason,
You
then
can
that's
usually
not
tell by
okay.
tone on that one if it's done deliberately and maliciously or not.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I can't add anything to that because I think we've covered it all. So
Go
I am
on.
going to slide and pass the bush back to Karen.
To give the word.
That was a lively one.
Apologies.
So thank you for joining us for 3Spoonies on labels and language. We'd love to know your thoughts in the chat. Please do feel free to subscribe for our weekly podcast and leave us a review. You can also buy us coffee if you like what we do. Links will be in the show notes. We'll see you next week for our next topic, which is sensory engagement and overwhelm. Have a great day. Keep track of your spoons.
And we promise we're not a cult.